Alrighty, sorry about the delay there, folks. Welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we begin a new quest beneath the sea. Starfish. Oh, hey, Warren Steele. Thank you for tuning in. Starfish by the man, the myth, legend, Peter Watts. I have posted in the stream description a link to his website. In fact, not just a link to the website, but a link to the book itself. If y'all want to read along, otherwise, it'll be fun because I'll be reading it at you. You can see all the things I get wrong. Let me check if this has an afterword because the copy I have, the physical copy I have, does some really interesting things. Okay, good, he does at the end of the book. We will read it there. So the copy I have, unfortunately, is like an nth printing that some... What company did this? Does this say what company did this? Feed Books, whoever they are. Don't buy things from them. Because this is well after this was Creative Commons. I thought I was getting an actual copy of the book. I was wrong. I am getting a copy of the PDF of the book, which is the actual book, but still. It also includes the Creative Commons license, which is, yeah. Let's see, line 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Non-commercial. You may not use this work for commercial purposes. So, um, whoever Feed Books are, screw them, heartily. Heartily and with feeling. I'm not a fan. So one of the things that'll happen in my copy is that whatever software they were using to transcribe this didn't know what degrees symbols were. So it's got like, I don't know, a double or triple question mark or something. So if I ever like take a pause right after a number, you know why. I'm like, wait a minute, what the hell? Oh, right, degrees. Um, so where do we start? Where do we start with Starfish? Other than at the beginning, obviously. So right now you are looking at the, let me, this I believe is the Jensen cover. So one of the cool things about, yeah boy, my boy, Peter Watts, is that he has copies of most, if not all, of the covers of his books posted on his website, as well as a bunch of fan art, because he's cool, okay? He's very cool. So I'll definitely be liberally taking from that, trying to give credit where it's due. So this is indeed the Jensen cover, Bruce Jensen, uh, from 1999, apparently, is the image that this one is from. So Peter Watts says of this image, Bruce Jensen's cover for the Tor edition of Starfish. Still gorgeous after all these years, even if I still don't know what the pink lobster claw-like thing is in Lenny's eye. Neither do I. I don't know. So I've got I don't, oh geez. How many do I have? I have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven? Seven covers. Um, so I've got to make at least 7 installments, right? So that's what he says on this one, on this first one. Bruce Jensen's cover for the Tor edition of Starfish, still gorgeous after all these years, even if I still don't know what the pink lobster claw-like thing is in Lenny's eye. It looks cool. The cover for Maelstrom is also very cool. We'll get there. All of Bruce Jensen's covers, in fact, are very cool. When we get to book 3, things are going to get a smidgen complicated. I will go over that issue when it comes. I've already talked about it on stream briefly after reading. It's kind of silly, but it is what it is. So yeah, there should be a new cover every week. I also will try to get some of the artwork fan art that people have done here. Like there's definitely this image of one of the characters. Uh, there's a couple images of these characters that I really, really, really am going to have to get there just so people know this is who this is. Um, Usually I'll be going with the ones that are more or less character accurate, uh, or that Peter Watts gushes about. Something interesting about Peter Watts's work. There's a very dedicated, very fiery, involved Eastern European fan base. So a lot of really cool art is coming from Poland and Russia and the like. So you'll be seeing that. Alrighty, so without further ado, look at the cool cover, and we'll get cracking. So a lot of this takes place under the sea, almost all of it, except for the parts that don't. Um, it is the near future, and I will rarely be explaining footnotes. There's one or two in um, Maelstrom where you understand it after the fact, but it doesn't really make sense at the time that I might be doing. But in Starfish, I don't think there's too many of those. Coming back and rereading this after having already read the entire series, it is amazing to me how well planned out this whole thing was. Like, I've read some long-term series that have been trilogies or longer that were just like, well, it's clearly going to be separate books. And in this, it's like, well, no, there was definitely a plan. There was definitely a plan. So, you will not be hearing too many different voices just yet. That will come week 2, where I've got to come up with, I don't know, like 7. So sit back, relax, and hope that I pronounce things correctly. I practiced. Prelude. Seratius. The abyss should shut you up. Sunlight hasn't touched these waters for 1,000,000 years. Atmospheres accumulate by the hundreds here. The trenches could swallow a dozen Everests without burping. They say life itself got started in the deep sea. Maybe. It can't have been an easy birth, judging by the life that remains. Monstrous things, twisted into nightmare shapes by lightless pressure and sheer chronic starvation. Even here, inside the hull, the abyss weighs on you like the vault of a cathedral. It's no place for trivial loudmouth bullshit. If you speak at all, you keep it down. But these tourists just don't seem to give a shit. Joel Kita's used to hearing a scaife breathe around him, hearing it talk in clicks and hisses. He relies on those sounds. The readouts only confirm what the beast has already told him by the grumbling of its stomach. But Seratius is a leisure craft, fully insulated, packed with excess headroom and reclining couches and little drink and drug dispensers set into the back of each seat. All he can hear today is the cargo, babbling. He glances back over his shoulder. The tour guide, a mid-twenties Hindian with a zebra cut, Pratila someone, flashes him a brief, rueful smile. She's a relict, and she knows it. She can't compete with the onboard library. She doesn't come with 3D animations or wraparound soundtrack. She's just a prop, really. These people pay her salary not because she does anything useful, but because she doesn't. What's the point of being rich if you only buy the essentials? There are 8 of them. One old guy in a codpiece, still closing on his first century, fiddles with his camera controls. The others are plugged into headsets, running a program carefully designed to occupy them through the descent without being so impressive that the actual destination is an anticlimax. It's a thin line these days. Simulations are almost always better than the real life, and real life gets blamed for the poor showing. Joel wishes this particular program was a bit better at holding the cargo's interest. They might shut up if they were paying more attention. They probably don't care whether Channer's sea monsters live up to the hype anyway. These people aren't down here because the abyss is impressive. They're here because it costs so much. He runs his eyes across the control board. Even that seems excessive. Climate control and in-dive entertainment take up a good half of the panel. Bored, he picks one of the headset feeds at random and taps in, sending the signal to a window on his main display. An 18th century woodcut of a kraken comes to life through the miracle of modern animation. Crudely rendered tentacles wrap around the masts of a galleon, pull it beneath chunky, carved waves. A female voice, designed to maximize attention from both sexes. "We have always peopled the sea with monsters," Joel tunes out. Mr. Codpiece comes up behind him, lays a familiar hand on his shoulder. Joel resists the urge to shrug it off. That's another problem with these tour subs. No real cockpit, just a set of controls at the front end of the passenger lounge. You can't shut yourself away from the cargo. "Quite a layout," Mr. Codpiece says. Joel reminds himself of his professional duties and smiles. "Been doing this run for long?" The whitecap's skin glows with a golden tan of cultured xanthophylls. Joel's smile grows a little more brittle. He's heard all about the benefits, of course. UV protection, higher blood oxygen, more energy. They say it even cuts down on your food requirements. Not that any of these people have to worry about grocery money. Still, it's too bloody freakish for Joel's tastes. Implants should be made out of meat, or at least plastic. If people were meant to photosynthesize, they'd have leaves. "I said," Joel nods, "couple of years." A grunt. "Didn't know Seabed Safaris was around that long." "I don't work for Seabed Safaris," Joel says, as politely as possible. "I freelance." The whitecap probably doesn't know any better, comes from a generation when everyone pledged allegiance to the same master year after year. Nobody thought it was such a bad thing back then. "Good for you." Mr. Codpiece gives him a fatherly pat on the shoulder. Joel nudges the rudders a bit to port. They've been cruising just off the southeastern shoulder of the rift. Floodlights doused. Sonar shows a featureless landscape of mud and boulders. The rift itself is another 5 or 10 minutes away. On the screen, the tourist program talks about giant squids attacking lifeboats during the Second World War, offers up a parade of archival photos as evidence. Human legs puckered with fist-sized conical wounds, where horn-rimmed suckers poured out gobbets of flesh. "Nasty! We gonna be seeing any giant squids?" Joel shakes his head. "Different tour." The program launches into a litany of deep-water nasties. A piece of flesh washed up onto a Florida beach, hinting at the existence of octopus 30 meters across. Giant eel larvae. Hypothesized monsters that might once have fed on the great whales, anonymously dying out for lack of food. Joel figures that 90% of this is bullshit, and the rest doesn't really count. Even giant squids don't go down into the really deep sea. Hardly anything does. No food. Joel's been rooting around down here for years, and he's never seen any real monsters. Except right here, of course. He touches a control. Outside, a high-frequency speaker begins whining at the abyss. "Hydrothermal vents bubble and boil along spreading zones in all of the world's oceans," the program chatters, "feeding crowds of giant clams and tube worms over 3 meters long." Stock footage of a vent community. "And yet, even at the spreading zones, it is only the filter feeders and the muckrakers that become giants. The fish, vertebrates like ourselves, are few and far between, and only a few centimeters long." An eel pout wriggles feebly across the display, looking more like a dismembered finger than a fish. "Except here," the program adds after a dramatic pause, "for there is something special about this tiny part of the Juan de Fuca Ridge, something unexplained. Here There be dragons. Joel hits another control. External bait lights flash to life across the bioluminescent spectrum. The cabin lights dim. To the denizens of the rift, drawn in by the sonics, a veritable school of food fish has suddenly appeared in their midst. We don't know the secret of the Channer vent. We don't know how it creates its strange and fascinating giants. The program's visual display goes dark. We only know that here, on the shoulder of the axial volcano, we have finally tracked the monsters to their lair. Something thumps against the outer hull. The acoustics of the passenger compartment make the sound seem unnaturally loud. At last, the passengers shut up. Mr. Codpiece mutters something and heads back to his seat, a giant chloroplast in a hurry. This concludes our introduction. The external cameras are linked to your headsets and can be aimed using normal head movements. Focus and record using the joystick on your right armrest. You may also wish to enjoy the view directly through any of the cabin viewports. If you require assistance, our guide and pilot are at your service. Seabed Safaris welcomes you to the Channer Vent and hopes that you enjoy the remainder of your tour. Two more thumps. A gray flash out the forward port. A sinuous belly caught for a moment in the headlight. A swirl of fin. On Joel's systems board, icons representing the outside cams dip and wiggle. Superfluous Pratila slides into the co-pilot seat. Regular feeding frenzy out there. Joel lowers his voice. In here, out there, what's the difference? She smiles, a safe, silent gesture of agreement. She's got a great smile. Almost makes up for the striped hair. Joel catches sight of something on the back of her left hand. It looks like a ref tattoo, but somehow he doubts that it's authentic. Fashion statement, more likely. You sure they can spare you? He asks Riley. She looks back. The cargo's starting up again. Look at that. Hey, it broke its tooth on us. Christ, aren't they ugly? They'll manage, Pratila says. Something looms up on the other side of the viewport, mouth like a sack full of needles, a tendril hanging from the lower jaw with a glowing bulb on the end. The jaw gapes wide enough to dislocate, snaps shut. Its teeth slide harmlessly across the viewport. A flat black eye glares in at them. What's that? Pratila wants to know. You're the tour guide. Never seen anything like it before. Me neither. He sends a trickle of electricity out through the hull. The monster, startled, flashes off into the darkness. Intermittent impacts resonate through Seratius, drawing renewed gasps from the cargo. How long until we're actually at Cheddar? Joel glances at Tactical. They're pretty much there already. Medium-sized hot fisher about 50 meters to the left. What's that? A row of bright dots, evenly spaced, has just moved onto the screen. Surveyor's stakes. Another row marches into range behind the first. For the geothermal program, you know? How about a quick drive-by? I bet those generators are pretty impressive. I don't think the generators are in yet. They're just laying the foundations. It'd still make a nice addition to the tour. We're supposed to steer clear. We'd catch royal shit if anyone's out there. Well? That smile again, more calculated this time. Is there? Probably not, Joel admits. Construction's been on hold for a couple of weeks, a fact which he finds particularly irritating. He's up for some fairly hefty contracts if the grid authority ever gets off its corporate ass and finishes what they started. Pratila looks at him expectantly. Joel shrugs. It's pretty unstable in there. Could get bumped around a bit. Dangerous? Depends on your definition. Probably not. So let's do it. Pratila lays a conspiratorial hand briefly on his shoulder. Seratius noses around to a new heading. Joel kills the bait lights and cranks the sonics up for one screeching farewell burst. The monsters outside, those that haven't already retired gracefully, their tiny their tiny fish brains having figured out that metal is inedible, run screaming into the night, lateral lines burning. There's a moment of surprised silence from the cargo. Pratila someone steps smoothly into the gap. Folks, we're taking a small detour to check out a new arrival on the rift. If you tap into the sonar feed, you'll see that we're approaching a checkerboard of acoustic beacons. The Grid Authority has laid these out in the course of constructing one of the new geothermal stations we've been hearing so much about. As you may know, similar prospects are underway at spreading zones all the way from the Galapagos to the Aleutians. When these go online, people will actually be living full time here on the rift. Joel can't believe it. Pratila's big chance to scoop the library, and she ends up talking exactly like it does. He quietly aborts a midbrain fantasy he's been nurturing. Try to get into Fantasy Pratila's jumpsuit now, and she'd probably start reciting a cheery blow-by-blow. He switches on the external floods. Mud. More mud. On sonar, the grid crawls towards them, a monotonous constellation. Something catches Seratius, slews it around. The hull thermistor spikes briefly. Thermistor? Thermal, folks! Joel calls back over his shoulder. Nothing to worry about. A dim, coppery sun resolves to starboard. It's a torch on a pole, basically, a territorial marker beating back the abyss with a sodium bulb and a VLF heartbeat. It's the Grid Authority, pissing on a rock for all and sundry. This is our hellhole. The line of towers stretches away to port, each crowned by a floodlight. Intersecting it, another line recedes directly ahead like streetlights on a smoggy night. They shine down on a strange, unfinished landscape of plastic and metal. Great metal casings lie against the bottom like derailed boxcars. Teardrop ROVs sit dormant on flat plastic puddles frozen harder than basalt. Sharp-edged conduits protrude from those congealed surfaces like hollow bones sawn off below the joint. Way up one of the port towers, something dark and fleshy assaults the light. Joel checks the camera icons, all zoomed, pointing up and left. Pratila, conserving O2, has retired her patter while the whitecaps gape. Fine. They want more mindless Piscine violence. Piscine violence. Give 'em more mindless Piscine violence. Seratius angles up and to port. It's an anglerfish. She bashes herself repeatedly against the floodlight, oblivious to Seratius's approach. Her dorsal spine lashes. The lure at its end, a glowing worm-shaped thing, luminesces furiously. Pratila's back at his shoulder. It's really doing a number on that light, isn't it? She's right. The top of the transponder is shaking under the impact of the big fish's blows, which is odd. These beasts are big, but they aren't very strong. And come to think of it, the tower's shaking back and forth even when the angler isn't touching it. Oh, shit! Joel grabs the controls. Seratius rears up like something living. Transponder glow drops off the bottom of the viewport. Total darkness drops in from above, swallowing the view. Startled shouts from the cargo. Joel ignores them. On all sides, the dull, distant sounds of something roaring. Joel hits the throttle. Seratius climbs. Something slaps from behind. The stern slides to port, pulling the bow back after it. The blackness beyond the viewport boils, sudden muddy brown, against the cabin lights. The hull thermistor spikes twice, 3 times. Ambient temperature flips from 4 degrees Celsius to 280, then back again. At lesser pressures, the Seratius would be dropping through live steam. Here, it only spins, skidding for traction against the superheated water. Finally, it finds some. Seratius ascends into welcome ice water. A fish skeleton pirouettes past the viewport, all teeth and spines, every vestige of flesh boiled away. Joel looks back over his shoulder. Pratila's fingers are locked around the back of his seat, their knuckles the same color as the dancing bones outside. The cargo are dead quiet. "Another thermal?" Pratila says in a shaky voice. Joel shakes his head. "Seabed cracked open. It's really thin around here." He manages a brief laugh. "Told you things could get a bit unstable." "Uh-huh." She releases her grip on Joel's chair. Fingernail imprints linger in the foam. She leans over, whispering, "Bring the cabin lights up a bit, will you? Sort of a nice living room level." And then she's headed aft, tending the cargo. "Well, that was exciting, but Joel assures us that little blow-ups like this happen all the time. Nothing to be worried about, although they can catch you off guard." Joel raises the cabin lights. The cargo sit quietly, still ostriched into their headsets. Pratila bustles among them, smoothing feathers. "And of course we still have the rest of our tour to look forward to." He ups the gain on sonar, focuses aft. A luminous storm swirls across the tactical display. Beneath it, a fresh ridge of oozing rock disfigures the GA's construction grid. Pratila is back at his elbow. "Joel?" "Yeah." "They say people are going to be living down there?" "Uh-huh." "Wow. Who?" He looks at her. "Haven't you seen the PR threads? Only the best and the brightest, holding back the everlasting night to stoke the fires of civilization." "Seriously, Joel, who?" He shrugs. "Fucked if I know." Helps if I demute myself. Part 1, Duet. Chapter 1, Constrictor. When the lights go out in BB's station, you can hear the metal groan. Letty Clark lies on her bunk, listening. Overhead, past pipes and wires and eggshell plating, 3 kilometers of black ocean try to crush her. She feels the rift underneath, tearing open the seabed with strength enough to move a continent. She lies there in that fragile refuge, and she hears BB's armor shifting by microns, hears its seams creak and not quite below the threshold of hears its seams creak not quite below the threshold of human hearing. God is a sadist on the Juan de Fuca rift, and his name is physics. How did they talk me into this? She wonders. Why did I come down here? But she already knows the answer. She hears Ballard moving out in the corner. She hears Ballard moving out in the corridor. Clark envies Ballard. Ballard never screws up, always seems to have her life under control. She almost seems happy down here. Clark rolls off her bunk and fumbles for a switch. Her cubby floods with dismal light. Pipes and access panels crowd the wall beside her. Aesthetics run a distant second to functionality when you're 3,000 meters down. She turns and catches sight of a slick black amphibian in the bulkhead mirror. It still happens, occasionally. She can sometimes forget what they've done to her. It takes a conscious effort to feel the machines lurking where her left lung used to be. She's so acclimated to the chronic ache in her chest, to that subtle inertia of plastic and metal as she moves, that she's scarcely aware of them anymore. She can still feel the memory of what it was to be fully human, and mistake that ghost for honest sensation. Such respites never last. There are mirrors everywhere in BB. They're supposed to increase the apparent size of one's personal space. Sometimes Clark shuts her eyes to hide from the reflections forever being thrown back at her. It doesn't help. She clenches her lids and feels the corneal caps beneath them, covering her eyes like smooth white cataracts. She climbs out of her cubby and moves along the corridor to the lounge. Ballard is waiting there, dressed in a dive skin and the usual air of confidence. Ballard stands up.
Ready to go?
"You're in charge," Clark says.
Only on paper.
Ballard smiles.
No pecking order down here, Lenny. As far as I'm concerned, we're equals.
After 2 days on the rift, Clark is still surprised by the frequency with which Ballard smiles. Ballard smiles at the slightest provocation. It doesn't always seem real. Something hits BB from the outside. Ballard's smile falters. They hear it again, a wet, muffled thud through the station's titanium skin.
It takes a while to get used to, Ballard says, doesn't it?
And again.
I mean, that sounds big.
Maybe we should turn the lights off, Clark suggests. She knows they won't. BB's exterior floodlights burn around the clock, an electric campfire pushing back the darkness. They can't see it from inside. BB has no windows, but somehow they draw comfort from the knowledge of that unseen fire. Thud! Most of the time.
Remember back in training, Ballard says over the sound, when they told us that the fish were usually so small?
Her voice trails off. BB creaks slightly. They listen for a while. There's no other sound.
It must have gotten tired, Ballard says. You'd think they'd figure it out.
She moves to the ladder and climbs downstairs. Clark follows her, a bit impatiently. There are sounds in BB that worry her far more than the futile attack of some misguided fish. Clark can hear tired alloys negotiating surrender. She can feel the ocean looking for a way in. What if it finds one? The whole weight of the Pacific could drop down and turn her into jelly. Any time. Better to face it outside, where she knows what's coming. All she can do in here is wait for it to happen. Going outside is like drowning, once a day. Clark stands facing Ballard, diveskin sealed, in an airlock that barely holds both of them. She has learned to tolerate the forced proximity. The glassy armor on her eyes helps a bit. Fuse seals, check headlamp, test injector. The ritual takes her, step by reflexive step, to that horrible moment when she awakens the machines sleeping within her, and changes. When she catches her breath and loses it. When a vacuum opens, somewhere in her chest, that swallows the air she holds. When a remaining lung shrivels in its cage, and her guts collapse. When myoelectric demons flood her sinuses and middle ears with isotonic saline. When every pocket of internal gas disappears in the time it takes to draw a breath. It always feels the same. The sudden, overwhelming nausea. The narrow confines of the airlock holding her erect while she tries to fall, seawater churning on all sides. Her face goes under. Vision blurs, then clears as her corneal caps adjust. She collapses against the walls and wishes she could scream. The floor of the airlock drops away like a gallows. Lenny Clark falls writhing into the abyss. Okay, so one of the difficulties I have coming up is there is the means that they communicate underwater, and I am not going to be consistent about this because it's going to be a lot of work to be consistent about it. Uh, it is going to hurt my throat to be consistent, so I'm not going to be consistent, but just pretend that you're hearing their voice the way you're first going to hear it. They come out of the freezing darkness, headlights blazing, into an oasis of sodium luminosity. Machines grow everywhere at the throat, like metal weeds. Cables and conduits spiderweb across the seabed in a dozen directions. The main pumps stand over 20 meters high, a regiment of submarine monoliths fading from sight on either side. Overhead floodlights bathe the jumbled structures in perpetual twilight. They stop for a moment, hands resting on the line that guided them here.
I'll never get used to it.
Ballard grates in a caricature of her usual voice. Clark glances at her wrist thermistor.
34 centigrade.
The words buzz, metallic, from her larynx. It feels so wrong to talk without breathing. Ballard lets go of the rope and launches herself into the light. After a moment, breathless, Clark follows. There's so much power here, so much wasted strength. Here, the continents themselves do ponderous battle. Magma freezes. Seawater boils. The very floor of the ocean is borne by painful centimeters each year. Human machinery does not make energy here at the dragon's throat. It merely hangs on and steals some insignificant fraction of it back to the mainland. Clark flies through canyons of metal and rock and knows what it is to be a parasite. She looks down. Shellfish the size of boulders, crimson worms 3 meters long, crowd the seabed between the machines. Legions of bacteria, hungry for sulfur, lace the water with milky veils. The water fills with a sudden, terrible cry. It doesn't sound like a scream. It sounds as though a great harp string is vibrating in slow motion. But Ballard is screaming, through some reluctant interface of flesh and metal.
Lenny!
Clark turns in time to see her own arm disappear into a mouth that seems impossibly huge. Teeth like scimitars clamp down on her shoulder. Clark stares into a scaly black face half a meter across. Some tiny dispassionate part of her searches for eyes in that monstrous fusion of spines and teeth and gnarled flesh, and fails. How can it see me? She wonders. Then the pain reaches her. She feels her arm being wrenched from its socket. The creature thrashes, shaking its head back and forth, trying to tear her into chunks. Every tug sets her nerves screaming. She goes limp. Please get it over with. If you're going to kill me, just please, God, make it quick. She feels the urge to vomit, but the skin over her mouth and her own collapsed insides won't let her. She shuts out the pain. She's had plenty of practice. She pulls inside, abandoning her body to ravenous vivisection, and from far away she feels the twisting of her attacker grow suddenly erratic. There's another creature at her side, with arms and legs and a knife. You know, a knife like the one you've got strapped to your leg and completely forgot about. And suddenly the monster is gone, its grip broken. Clark tells her neck muscles to work. It's like operating a marionette. Her head turns. She sees Ballard locked in combat with something as big as she is. Only Ballard is tearing it to pieces with her bare hands. Its icicle teeth splinter and snap. Dark ice water courses from its wounds, tracing mortal convulsions with smoke trails of suspended gore. The creature spasms weakly. Ballard pushes it away. A dozen smaller fish dart into the light and begin tearing at the carcass. Photophores on their sides flash like frantic rainbows. Clark watches from the other side of the world.
The pain in her side keeps its distance, a steady, pulsing ache. She looks. Her arm is still there. She can even move her fingers without any trouble. I've had worse, she thinks. Then, why am I still alive? Ballard appears at her side. Her lens-covered eyes shine like photophores themselves.
Jesus Christ,
Ballard says in a distorted whisper.
Lenny, you okay?
Clark dwells on the inanity of the question for a moment, but surprisingly, she feels intact. Yeah. And if not, she knows, it's her own damn fault. She just lay there. She just waited to die. She was asking for it. She's always asking for it. Back in the airlock, the water recedes around them, and within them. Clark's stolen breath, released at last, races back along visceral channels, reinflating lung and gut and spirit. Ballard splits the face seal on her skin, and her words tumble into the wet room.
Jesus, Jesus, I don't believe it. My God, did you see that thing? They get so huge around here.
She passes her hands across her face. Her corneal caps come off, milky hemispheres dropping from enormous hazel eyes.
And to think they're usually just a few centimeters long.
She starts to strip down, unzipping her skin along the forearms, talking the whole time.
And yet it was almost fragile, you know. Hit it hard enough and it just came apart. Jesus.
Ballard always removes her uniform indoors. Clark suspects she'd rip the recycler out of her own thorax if she could, throw it in a corner with the skin and the eye caps until the next time it was needed. Maybe she's got her other lung in her cabin, Clark muses. Maybe she keeps it in a jar and she stuffs it back into her chest at night. She feels a bit dopey, probably just an after effect of the neuroinhibitors her implants put out whenever she's outside. Small price to pay to keep my brain from shorting out. I really shouldn't mind. Ballard peels her skin down to the waist. Just under her left breast, the electrolyzer intake pokes out through her rib cage. Clark stares vaguely at that perforated disc in Ballard's flesh. The ocean goes into us there, she thinks. The old knowledge seems newly significant, somehow. We suck it into us and steal its oxygen and spit it out again. Prickly numbness is spreading, leaking through her shoulder into her chest and neck. Clark shakes her head, once, to clear it. She sags suddenly, against the hatchway. Am I in shock? Am I fainting?
I mean,
Ballard stops, looks at Clark with an expression of sudden concern.
Jesus, Lenny, you look terrible. You shouldn't have told me you were okay if you weren't.
The tingling reaches the base of Clark's skull. I'm okay, she says. Nothing broke. I'm just bruised.
Garbage. Take off your skin.
Clark straightens with effort. The numbness recedes a bit. It's nothing I can't take care of myself. Don't touch me. Please don't touch me. Ballard steps forward without a word and unseals the skin around Clark's forearm. She peels the material and exposes an ugly purple bruise. She looks at Clark with one raised eyebrow. Just a bruise, Clark says. I'll take care of it, really. Thanks anyway. She pulls her hand away from Ballard's ministrations. Ballard looks at her for a moment. She smiles ever so slightly.
Lenny, she says, there's no need to feel embarrassed.
About what?
You know, me having to rescue you. You going to pieces when that thing attacked. It was perfectly understandable. Most people have a rough time adjusting. I'm just one of the lucky ones.
Right. You've always been one of the lucky ones, haven't you? I know you're kind, Ballard. You've never failed at anything.
You don't have to feel ashamed about it, Ballard reassures her.
I don't, Clark says, honestly. She doesn't feel much of anything anymore. Just the tingling and the tension, and a vague sort of wonder that she's even alive. The bulkhead is sweating. The deep sea lays icy hands on the metal, and, inside, Clark watches the humid atmosphere bead and run down the wall. She sits rigid on her bunk under dim fluorescent light, every wall of the cubby within easy reach. The ceiling is too low. The room is too narrow. She feels the ocean compressing the station all around her. And all I can do is wait. The anabolic salve on her injuries is warm and soothing. Clark probes the purple flesh of her arm with practiced fingers. The diagnostic tools in the med cubby have vindicated her. She's lucky this time. Bones intact, epidermis unbroken. She seals up her skin, hiding the damage. She shifts on the pallet, turns to face the inside wall. Her reflection stares back at her through eyes like frosted glass. She watches the image, admires its perfect mimicry of each movement. Flesh and phantom move together, bodies masked, faces neutral. That's me, she thinks. That's what I look like now. She tries to read what lies behind that glacial facade. Am I bored, horny, upset? How to tell, with her eyes hidden behind those corneal opacities? She sees no trace of the tension she always feels. I could be terrified. I could be pissing in my skin and no one would know. She leans forward. The reflection comes to meet her. They stare at each other, white to white, ice to ice. For a moment, they almost forget BB's ongoing war against pressure. For a moment, they don't mind the claustrophobic solitude that grips them. How many times, Clark wonders, have I wanted eyes as dead as these? BB's metal viscera crowd the corridor beyond her cubby. Clark can barely stand erect. A few steps bring her into the lounge. Ballard, back in shirt sleeves, is at one of the library terminals.
Rickets, she says.
What?
Fish down here don't get enough trace elements. They're rotten with deficiency diseases. Doesn't matter how fierce they are. They bite too hard, they break their teeth on us.
Clark stabs buttons on the food processor. The machine grumbles at her touch. I thought there was all sorts of food at the Rift. That's why things got so big.
There's a lot of food. It's just not very good quality.
A vaguely edible lozenge of sludge oozes from the processor onto Clark's plate. She eyes it for a moment. I can relate.
You're gonna eat in your gear?
Bleh, let's try that again.
You're going to eat in your gear?
Ballard asks, as Clark sits down at the lounge table. Clark blinks at her. Yeah? Why?
Oh, nothing. It would just be nice to talk to someone with pupils in their eyes, you know?
Sorry, I can take them off if you.
No, it's no big thing. I can live with it.
Ballard turns off the library and sits down across from Clark.
So, how do you like the place so far?
Clark shrugs and keeps eating.
I'm glad we're only down here for a year, Ballard says. This place could get to you after a while.
It could be worse.
Oh, I'm not complaining. I was looking for a challenge after all. What about you?
Me?
What brings you down here? What are you looking for?
Clark doesn't answer for a moment. I don't know, really. she says at last. Privacy, I guess. Ballard looks up. Clark stares back, her face neutral.
Well, I'll leave you to it then.
Ballard says pleasantly. Clark watches her disappear down the corridor. She hears the sound of a cubby hatch hissing shut. Give it up, Ballard, she thinks. I'm not the sort of person you really want to know. Almost start of the morning shift. The food processor disgorges Clark's breakfast with its usual reluctance. Ballard, in communications, is just getting off the phone. A moment later, she appears in the hatchway.
Management says,
She stops.
you've got blue eyes.
Clark smiles faintly. You've seen them before.
I know, it's just kind of surprising. It's been a while since I've seen you without your caps in.
Clark sits down with her breakfast. So, what does management say?
We're on schedule. Rest of the crew comes down in 3 weeks. We go online in 4.
Ballard sits down across from Clark.
I wonder sometimes why we're not online right now.
I guess they just want to be sure everything works.
Still, it seems like a long time for a dry run, and you'd think that, well, they'd want to get the geothermal program up and running as fast as possible after all that's happened.
After LePro and Winshire melted down, you mean?
And there's something else.
Ballard says.
I can't get through to Picard.
I think that's how that's pronounced. It's spelled like Pickard, but I believe it's Picard, and I only know that because that is the explorer. Okay, I'm not going to get into this discussion right now. I'm going to wait till we're done. Then you'll hear about Picard and BB. Just give me like an hour. I'll deal with this later. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Ah, where were we? Clark looks up. Picard's station is anchored on the Galapagos Rift. It is not a particularly stable mooring.
You ever meet the couple there?
Ballard asks.
Ken Lubin, Lana Chung?
Clark shakes her head. They went through before me. I never met any of the other Rifters except you.
Nice people. I thought I'd call them up, see how things were going at Picard, but nobody can get through.
Line down?
They say it's probably something like that. Nothing serious. They're sending a scaife down to check it out.
Maybe the seabed opened up and swallowed them whole, Clark thinks. Maybe the hull had a weak plate. One's all it would take. Something creaks deep in BB's superstructure. Clark looks around. The walls seem to have moved closer while she wasn't looking.
Sometimes, she says, I wish we didn't keep.
Oh, wait. Sometimes, she says, I wish we didn't keep BB at surface pressure. Sometimes I wish we were pumped up to ambient, to take the strain off the hull. She knows it's an impossible dream. Most gases kill outright when breathed in at 300 atmospheres. Even oxygen would do you in if it got above 1 or 2%. Ballard shivers dramatically.
If you want to risk breathing 99% hydrogen, you're welcome to it. I'm happy the way things are.
She smiles.
Besides, you have any idea how long it would take to decompress afterwards?
In the systems cubby, something bleats for attention.
Seismic. Wonderful.
Ballard disappears into calm. Clark follows. An amber line is writhing across one of the displays. It looks like the EEG of someone caught in a nightmare.
Get your eyes back in, Ballard says. The throat's acting up.
They can hear it all the way to BB, a malign, almost electrical hiss from the direction of the throat. Clark follows Ballard towards it, one hand running lightly along the guide rope. The distant smudge of light that marks their destination seems wrong somehow. The color is different. It ripples. They swim into its glowing nimbus and see why. The throat is on fire. Sapphire auroras slide flickering across the generators. At the far end of the array, almost invisible with distance, a pillar of smoke swirls up into the darkness like a great tornado. The sound it makes fills the abyss. Clark closes her eyes for a moment and hears rattlesnakes.
Jesus! Ballard shouts over the noise. It's not supposed to do that.
Clark checks her thermistor. 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 It won't settle. Water temperature goes from 4 degrees to 38 and back again. Within seconds. A myriad of ephemeral currents tug at them as they watch. Actually, wouldn't it be myriad ephemeral currents without the A? Myriad ephemeral currents tug at them as they watch.
Why the light show?
Clark calls back.
I don't know.
Ballard answers.
Bioluminescence, I guess. Heat-sensitive bacteria.
Without warning, the tumult dies. The ocean empties of sound. Phosphorescent spider webs wriggle dimly on the metal and vanish. In the distance, the tornado sighs and fragments into a few transient dust devils. A gentle rain of black soot begins to fall in the copper light.
Smoker.
Ballard says into the sudden stillness.
A big one.
Listen, I could do the gargly throat noise that I would need to make.
It's kind of a robot voice.
To emulate what they're doing, but I'm not doing it because I will not be able to talk for the next week. Which works out perfectly. I wouldn't have to talk until every Free Read Fridays. There you go. My voice would drop 2 octaves in a month. Is what would happen. It'd be like I'd had a lifetime habit of cigarettes and scotch. Except not as refined and more bloody. A big one. They swim to the place where the geyser erupted. There's a fresh wound in the seabed, a gash several meters long, between 2 of the generators.
That wasn't supposed to happen.
Ballard says.
That's why they built here, for crying out loud. It was supposed to be stable.
The rift's never stable, Clark replies.
Not much point in being here if it was.
Oh, wait, that's not much point in being here if it was. Sorry. It resonates more in my head when I'm doing that, by the way, because I'm doing things. It's probably not translating at all. I'll listen to it afterwards and cringe. It's okay. Ballard swims up through the fallout and pops an access plate on one of the generators.
Well, according to this, there's no damage,
She calls down after looking inside.
Hang on, let me switch channels here.
Clark touches one of the cylindrical sensors strapped to her waist and stares into the fissure. I should be able to fit through there, she decides. And does.
We were lucky,
Ballard is saying above her.
The other generators are okay too. Oh, wait a second. Number 2 has a clogged cooling duct, but it's not serious. Backups can handle it. Get out of there!
Far more expression than she would have. Clark looks up, one hand on the sensor she's planting. Ballard stares down at her through a chimney of fresh rock.
Are you crazy?
Ballard shouts.
That's an active smoker.
Clark looks down again, deeper into the shaft. It twists out of sight in the mineral haze. We need temperature readings, she says, from inside the mouth.
Get out of there! It could go off again and fry you.
I suppose it could at that, Clark thinks. It already blew, she calls back. It'll take a while to build up a fresh head. She twists a knob on the sensor. Tiny explosive bolts blast into the rock, anchoring the device.
Get out of there now!
Just a second. Clark turns the sensor on and kicks up and kicks up out of the seabed. Ballard grabs her arm as she emerges, starts to drag her away from the smoker. Clark stiffens and pulls free. Don't touch me. She catches herself. I'm out, okay? You don't have to.
Farther.
Ballard keeps swimming.
Over here.
I don't even know how it makes the H noise. Probably the same way a speaker makes an H noise, because it's going through a speaker. They're near the edge of the light now, the floodlit throat on one side, blackness on the other. Ballard faces Clark.
Are you out of your mind? We could have gone back to BB for a drone. We could have planted it on remote.
Clark doesn't answer. She sees something moving in the distance behind Ballard. Watch your back, she says. Ballard turns and sees the gulper sliding toward them. It undulates through the water like brown smoke, silent and endless. Clark can't see the creature's tail, although several meters of serpentine flesh have come out of the darkness. Ballard goes for her knife. After a moment, Clark does too. The gulper's jaw drops open like a great jagged scoop. Ballard begins to launch herself at the thing, knife upraised. Clark puts her hand out.
Wait a minute. It's not coming at us.
The front end of the gulper is about 10 meters distant now. Its tail pulls free of the murk.
Are you crazy?
Ballard moves clear of Clark's hand, still watching the monster.
Maybe it isn't hungry,
Clark says. She can see its eyes, two tiny, unwinking spots glaring at them from the tip of the snout.
They're always hungry. Did you sleep through the briefings?
The gulper closes its mouth and passes. It extends around them now, in a great meandering arc. The head turns back to look at them. It opens its mouth.
Fuck this,
Ballard says, and charges. Her first stroke opens a meter-long gash in the creature's side. The gulper stares at Ballard for a moment, as if astonished. Then, ponderously, it thrashes. Clark watches without moving. Why can't she just let it go? Why does she always have to prove she's better than everything? Ballard strikes again. This time she slashes into a great tumorous swelling that has to be the stomach. She frees the things inside. They spill out through the wound. Two huge gigantorids and some misshapen creature Clark doesn't recognize. One of the gigantorids is still alive and in a foul mood. It locks its teeth around the first thing it encounters. Ballard, from behind.
Lanny!
Ballard's knife hand is swinging in staccato arcs. The gigantorid begins to come apart. Its jaws remain locked. The convulsing gulper crashes into Ballard and sends her spinning to the bottom. Finally, Clark begins to move. The gulper collides with Ballard again. Clark moves in low, hugging the bottom, and pulls the other woman clear. Ballard's knife continues to dip and twist. The gigantorid is a mutilated wreck behind the gills, but its grip remains unbroken. Ballard can't twist around far enough to reach the skull. Clark comes in from behind and takes the creature's head in her hands. It stares at her, malevolent and unthinking.
Kill it!
Ballard shouts.
Jesus, what are you waiting for?
Clark closes her eyes and clenches. The skull in her hand splinters like cheap plastic. There is a silence. After a while, she opens her eyes. The gulper is gone, fled back into darkness to heal or die. But Ballard's still there, and Ballard is angry.
What's wrong with you? She says.
Clark unclenches her fists. Bits of bone and jellied flesh float about her fingers.
You're supposed to back me up. Why are you so damned passive all the time?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sometimes it works. Ballard reaches behind her back.
I'm cold. I think it punctured my dive skin.
Clark swims behind her and looks. A couple of holes. How are you otherwise? Feel anything broken? Anything feel broken?
It broke through the dive skin,
Ballard says, as if to herself.
and when that gulper hit me, it could have.
She turns to Clark, and her voice, even distorted, carries a shocked uncertainty.
I could have been killed. I could have been killed.
For an instant, it's as though Ballard's skin and eyes and self-assurance have all been stripped away. For the first time, Clark can see through to the weakness beneath, growing like a delicate tracery of hairline cracks. You can screw up too, Ballard. It isn't all fun and games. You know that now. It hurts, doesn't it? Somewhere inside, the slightest touch of sympathy. It's okay, Clark says. Jeanette, it's okay.
You idiot!
Ballard hisses. She stares at Clark like some malign and sightless old woman.
You just floated there. You just let it happen to me.
Clark feels her guard snap up again, just in time. This isn't just anger, she realizes. This isn't just the heat of the moment. She doesn't like me. She doesn't like me at all. And then, dully surprised that she hasn't seen it before, she never did. How are we digging it so far? Quick feedback. How are the underwater voices? Are they audible? Are they comprehensible? Because if not, then I will just not do them like that. It is much easier for me to not do them like that. But if they are comprehensible, I will continue to do it, no matter how annoying it sounds. My guess is pretty annoying because it's driving me nuts. But I'll keep doing it, and I'll do it again. Unless it doesn't work, in which case we won't do that anymore. Chapter 2, A Niche. BB Station floats tethered above the seabed, a gunmetal gray planet ringed by a belt of equatorial floodlights. There's an airlock for divers at the South Pole and a docking hatch for scapes at the North. In between, there are girders and anchor lines, conduits and cables, metal armor, and Lenny Clark. She's doing a routine visual check on the hull, standard procedure, once a week. Ballard is inside, testing some equipment in the communications hub. Bleh, testing some equipment in the communications cubby. It is not entirely within the spirit of the buddy system. Clark prefers it this way. Relations have been civil over the past couple of days. Ballard even resurrects her patented chumminess on occasion. But the more time they spend together, the more forced things get. Eventually, Clark knows, something is going to break. Besides, out here, it seems only natural to be alone. She's examining a cable clamp when a razor mouth charges into the light. It's about 2 meters long and hungry. It rams directly into the nearest of BB's flood lamps, mouth agape. Several teeth shatter against the crystal lens. The razor mouth twists to one side, knocking the hull with its tail, and swims off until barely visible against the dark. Clark watches, fascinated. The razor mouth swims back and forth, then charges again. The flood weathers the impact easily, doing more damage to its attacker. Over and over again, the fish batters itself against the light. Finally, exhausted, it sinks twitching down to the muddy bottom.
Lenny, you okay?
Clark feels the words buzzing in her lower jaw. She trips the sender in her dive skin.
I'm okay. I heard something out there, Ballard says. I just wanted to make sure you were.
I'm fine, Clark says. Just a fish.
They never learn, do they?
No, I guess not. See you later.
See?
Clark switches off her receiver. Poor stupid fish. How many millennia did it take for them to learn that I know how to say bioluminescence. Why do I not right now? How many millennia did it take for them to learn that bioluminescence equals food? How long will BB have to sit here before they learn that electric light doesn't? We could keep our headlights off. Maybe they'd leave us alone. She stares out past BB's electric halo. There is so much blackness there. It almost hurts to look at it. Without lights, without sonar, how far could she go into that viscous shroud and still return? Clark kills her headlight. Night edges a bit closer, but BB's lights keep it at bay. Clark turns until she's face to face with the darkness. She crouches like a spider against BB's hull. She pushes off. The darkness embraces her. She swims, not looking back, until her legs grow tired. She doesn't know how far she's come, but it must be light years. The ocean is full of stars. Behind her, the station shines brightest, with coarse yellow rays. In the opposite direction, she can barely make out the throat, an insignificant sunrise on the horizon. Everywhere else, living constellations punctuate the dark. Here, a string of pearls blinks sexual advertisements at 2-second intervals. Here, a sudden flash leaves diversionary afterimages swarming across Clark's field of view. Something flees under cover of her momentary blindness. There, a counterfeit worm twists lazily in the current, invisibly tied to the roof of some predatory mouth. There are so many of them. She feels a sudden surge in the water, as if something big has just passed very close. A delicious thrill dances through her body. It nearly touched me, she thinks. I wonder what it was. The rift is full of monsters who don't know when to quit. It doesn't matter how much they eat. Their voracity is as much a part of them as their elastic bellies, their unhinging jaws. Ravenous dwarves attack giants twice their own size, and sometimes win. The abyss is a desert. No one can afford the luxury of waiting for better odds. But even a desert has oases, and sometimes the deep hunters find them. They come upon the malnourishing abundance of the rift and gorge themselves. Their descendants grow huge and bloated over such delicate bones. My light was off, and it left me alone. I wonder. She turns it back on. Her vision clouds in the sudden glare, then clears. The ocean reverts to unrelieved black. No nightmares accost her. The beam lights empty water wherever she points it. She switches it off. There's a moment of absolute darkness while her eye caps adjust to the reduced light. Then the stars come out again. They're so beautiful. Lenny Clark rests on the bottom of the ocean and watches the abyss sparkle around her. And she almost laughs as she realizes, 3,000 meters from the nearest sunlight, that it's only dark when the lights are on.
What the hell is wrong with you? You've been gone for over 3 hours. Did you know that? Why didn't you answer me?
Clark bends over and removes her fins. I guess I turned my receiver off, she says. I was. Wait a second, did you say.
You guess? Have you forgotten every safety reg
Grilled. You can tell I'm hungry. I
they drilled into us? You're supposed to have your receiver on from the moment you leave BB until you get back.
Did you say 3 hours?
I couldn't even come out after you. I couldn't find you on sonar. I just had to sit here and hope you'd show up.
It only seems a few minutes since she pushed off into the darkness. Clark climbs into the lounge, suddenly chilled.
Where were you, Lenny?
Ballard demands, coming up behind her. Clark hears the slightest plaintive tone in her voice. I I must have been on the bottom, Clark says. That's why sonar didn't get me. I didn't go far. Was I asleep? What was I doing for 3 hours? I was just wandering around. I lost track of the time. I'm sorry.
Stop it. Warren, you make me hungrier.
God, that sounds good.
Not good enough. Don't do it again.
There's a brief silence. It's ended by the sudden, familiar impact of flesh on metal.
Christ! Ballard snaps. I'm turning the externals off right now.
Whatever it is gets in 2 more hits by the time Ballard reaches calm. Clark hears her punch a couple of buttons. Ballard comes back into the lounge.
There. Now we're invisible.
Something hits them again. And again. Or maybe not, Clark says. Ballard stands in the lounge, listening to the rhythm of the assault.
They don't show up on sonar, she says, almost whispering. Sometimes when I hear them coming at us, I tune it down to extreme close range, but it looks right through 'em.
No gas bladders, nothing to bounce an echo off of.
We show up just fine out there most of the time, but not those things. You can't find them no matter how high you turn up the gain. They're like ghosts.
They're not ghosts. Almost unconsciously, Clark has been counting the beats. 8, 9. Ballard turns to face her.
They've shut down Picard.
She says, and her voice is small and tight. What?
The grid office says it's just some technical problem, but I've got a friend in personnel. I phoned him when you were outside. He says Lana's in the hospital, and I get the feeling.
Ballard shakes her head.
It sounded like Ken Lubin did something down there. I think maybe he attacked her.
3 thumps from outside, in rapid succession. Clark can feel Ballard's eyes on her. The silence stretches.
Or maybe not, Ballard says. We got all those personality tests. If he was violent, they would have picked it up before they sent him down.
Clark watches her, listens to the pounding of an intermittent fist.
Or maybe the rift changed him somehow. Maybe they misjudged the pressure we'd all be under, so to speak.
Ballard musters a feeble smile.
Not the physical danger so much as the emotional stress, you know. Everyday things. Just being outside could get to you after a while. Seawater sluicing through your chest, not breathing for hours at a time. It's like living without a heartbeat.
She looks up at the ceiling. The sounds from outside are a bit more erratic now. Outside's not so bad, Clark says. At least you're incompressible. At least you don't have to worry about the plates giving in.
I don't think you'd change suddenly. It would just sort of sneak up on you, little by little. Then one day you'd just wake up changed. You'd be different somehow, only you'd never have noticed the transition. Like Ken Lubin.
And she looks at Clark. She looks at Clark, and her voice drops a bit.
And you.
Me. Clark turns Ballard's words over in her mind, waits for the onset of some reaction. She feels nothing but her own indifference. I don't think you have much to worry about. I'm not the violent type.
I know. I'm not worried about my own safety, Lenny. I'm worried about yours.
Clark looks at her from behind the impervious safety of her lenses and doesn't answer.
You've changed since you came down here, Ballard says. You're withdrawing from me. You're exposing yourself to unnecessary risks. I don't know exactly what's happening to you. It's almost like you're trying to kill yourself.
I'm not, Clark says. She tries to change the subject. Is Lana Chung all right? Ballard studies her for a moment. She takes the hint.
I don't know. I couldn't get any details.
Clark feels something knotting up inside of her. I wonder what she did to set him off, she murmurs. Ballard stares at her, open-mouthed.
What she did? I can't believe you said that.
I only meant
I know what you meant.
the outside pounding has stopped. Ballard does not relax. She stands hunched over in those strange, loose-fitting clothes that drybacks wear and stares at the ceiling as though she doesn't believe in the silence. She looks back at Clark.
Lenny, you know I don't like to pull rank, but your attitude is putting both of us at risk. I think this place is really getting to you. I hope you can get back online here. I really do. Otherwise, I may have to recommend you for a transfer.
Clark watches Ballard leave the lounge. You're lying, she realizes. You're scared to death, and it's not just because I'm changing. It's because you are. Clark finds out 5 hours after the fact. Something has changed on the ocean floor. We sleep and the earth moves, she thinks, studying the topographic display. And next time, or the time after, maybe it'll move right out from under us. I wonder if I'll have time to feel anything. She turns at a sound behind her. Ballard is standing in the lounge, swaying slightly. Her face seems somehow disfigured by the concentric rings in her eyes, by the dark hollows around them. Naked eyes are beginning to look alien to Clark. The seabed shifted, Clark says. There's a new outcropping about 200 meters west of us.
That's odd. I didn't feel anything.
It happened about 5 hours ago. You were asleep. Ballard glances up sharply. Clark studies the haggard lines on her face. On second thought,
I would have woken up,
Ballard says.
Would have woken up.
Ballard says. She squeezes past Clark into the cubby and checks the topographic display. 2 meters high, 12 long, Clark recites. Ballard doesn't answer. She punches some commands into a keyboard. The topographic image dissolves, reforms into a column of numbers.
Just as I thought, she says. No heavy seismic activity for over 42 hours.
Sonar doesn't lie, Clark says calmly.
Neither does Seismo,
Ballard answers. There's a brief silence. There's a standard procedure for such things, and they both know what it is. We have to check it out, Clark says. But Ballard only nods.
Give me a moment to change.
They call it a squid, a jet-propelled cylinder about a meter long, with a headlight at the front end and a tow bar at the back. Clark, floating between BB and the seabed, checks it over with one hand. Her other hand grips a sonar pistol. She points the pistol into the blackness. Ultrasonic clicks sweep the night, give her a bearing.
That way,
She says, pointing. Ballard squeezes down on her own squid's tow bar. The machine pulls her away. After a moment, Clark follows, bringing up the rear. A third squid carries an assortment of sensors in a nylon bag. Ballard's traveling at nearly full throttle. The lamps on her helmet and squid stab the water like twin lighthouse beacons. Clark, her own lights doused, catches up about halfway to their destination. They cruise along a couple of meters over the muddy substrate.
your lights.
Ballard says. We don't need them. Sonar works in the dark.
Are you breaking regs for the sheer thrill of it now?
The fish down here, they key on things that glow.
Turn your lights on. That's an order.
Clark doesn't answer. She watches the beams beside her, Ballard's squid shining steadily and unwavering. Steady and unwavering. Ballard's headlamp slicing the water in erratic arcs as she moves her head.
I told you,
Ballard says.
Turn your Christ!
It was just a glimpse, caught for a moment in the sweep of Ballard's headlight. She jerks her head around and it slides back out of sight. Then it looms up in the squid's beam, huge and terrible. The abyss is grinning at them, teeth bared. A mouth stretches across the width of the beam, extends into darkness on either side. It is crammed with conical teeth the size of human hands, and they do not look the least bit fragile. Ballard makes a strangled noise and dives into the mud. The benthic ooze boils up around her in a seething cloud. She disappears in a torrent of planktonic corpses. Lenny Clark stops and waits, unmoving. She stares transfixed at that threatening smile. Her whole body feels electrified. She's never been so explicitly aware of herself. Every nerve fires and freezes at the same time. She is terrified. But she's also, somehow, completely in control of herself. She reflects on this paradox as Ballard's abandoned squid slows and stops itself, scant meters from that endless row of teeth. She wonders at her own analytical clarity as the third squid, with its burden of sensors, decelerates past and takes up position beside Ballard's. There in the light, the grin does not change. Clark raises her sonar pistol and fires. We're here, she realizes, checking the readout. That's the outcropping. She swims closer. The smile hangs there, enigmatic and enticing. Now she can see bits of bone at the roots of the teeth and tatters of decomposed flesh trailing from the gums. She turns and backtracks. The cloud on the seabed is starting to settle. Ballard, she says in her synthetic voice. Nobody answers. Clark reaches down through the mud, feeling blind, until she touches something warm and trembling. The seabed explodes in her face. Ballard erupts from the substrate, trailing a muddy comet's tail. There we go. Her hand rises from that sudden cloud, clasped around something glinting in the transient light. Clark sees the knife, twists almost too late. The blade glances off her skin, igniting nerves along her rib cage. Ballard lashes out again. This time, Clark catches the knife hand as it shoots past, twists it, pushes. Ballard tumbles away.
It's me!
Clark shouts. The vocoder turns her voice into a tinny vibrato. Ballard rises up again, white eyes unseeing, knife still in hand. Clark holds up her hands.
It's okay. There's nothing here. It's dead.
Ballard stops. She stares at Clark. She looks over to the squids, to the smile they illuminate. She stiffens.
It's some kind of whale, Clark says. It's been dead a long time. A whale?
Ballard rasps. She begins to shake. There's no need to feel embarrassed, Clark almost says, but doesn't. Instead, she reaches out and touches Ballard lightly on the arm. Is this how you do it? She wonders. Ballard jerks back as if scalded. I guess not.
Jeanette,
Clark begins. Ballard raises a trembling hand, cutting Clark off.
I'm okay. I think we should get back now, don't you?
Okay, Clark says, but she doesn't really mean it. She could stay out here all day. I love how this is actually working out timing-wise perfectly. This is going to be spot on. Spot on. Subsequent installments are going to be a bit trickier. I don't want to have to cut them into weird chunks, but like so far it's going to work out pretty well. The first two should be fine. That's the last ones that are going to be problematic. Ballard is at the library again. She turns, passing a casual hand over the brightness control as Clark comes up behind her. The display darkens before Clark can see what it is. Clark glances at the iPhones hanging from the terminal, puzzled. If Ballard doesn't want her to see what she's reading, she could just use those. But then she wouldn't see me coming.
I think maybe it was a Ziphiid.
I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Ballard's saying,
A beaked whale, except it had too many teeth. Very rare. They don't dive this deep.
Clark listens, not really interested. Ziphiid. Ziphiid. I think that's right.
It must have died and rotted farther up and then sank.
Ballard's voice is slightly raised. She looks almost furtively at something on the other side of the lounge.
I wonder what the chances are of that happening.
What? What?
I mean, in all the ocean, something that big just happening to drop out of the sky a few hundred meters away. The odds of that must be pretty low.
Yeah, I guess so. Clark reaches over and brightens the display. One half of the screen glows softly with luminous text. The other holds the rotating image of a complex molecule. What's this? Clark asks. Ballard steals another glance across the lounge.
Just an old biopsyche text the library had on file. I was browsing through it. Used to be an interest of mine.
Clark looks at her. Uh-huh. She bends over and studies the display. Some sort of technical chemistry. The only thing she really understands is the caption beneath the graphic. She reads it aloud. True happiness.
Yeah, a tricyclic with 4 side chains.
Ballard points at the screen.
Whenever you're happy, really happy, that's what does it to you.
When did they find that out?
I don't know. It's an old book.
Clark stares at the revolving simulacrum. It disturbs her somehow. It floats there over that smug, stupid caption, and it says something she doesn't want to hear. You've been solved, it says. You're mechanical, chemicals, and electricity. Everything you are, every dream, every action, it all comes down to a change of voltage somewhere. Or what did she say? A tricyclic with 4 side chains. It's wrong, Clark murmurs. Or they'd be able to fix us when we broke down.
Sorry?
Ballard says. It's saying we're just these soft computers with faces. Ballard shuts off the terminal.
That's right, she says, and some of us may even be losing those.
The jibe registers, but it doesn't hurt. Clark straightens and moves towards the ladder.
Where are you going? You going outside again?
Ballard asks. The shift isn't over. I thought I'd clean out the duct on number 2.
It's a bit late to start on that, Lenny. The shift will be over before we're even half done.
Ballard's eyes dart away again. This time, Clark follows the glance to the full-length mirror on the far wall. On the far wall. There we go. She sees nothing of particular interest there. I'll work late. Clark grabs the railing, swings her foot onto the top rung.
Lenny,
Ballard says, and Clark swears she hears a tremor in that voice. She looks back, but the other woman is moving to calm.
well, I'm afraid I can't go with you, she's saying. I'm in the middle of debugging one of the telemetry routines.
That's fine, Clark says. She feels the tension starting to rise. BB is shrinking again. She starts down the ladder.
Are you sure you're okay going out alone? Maybe you should wait until tomorrow.
No, I'm okay.
Well, remember to keep your receiver open. I don't want you getting lost on me again.
Clark is in the wet room. She climbs into the airlock and runs through the ritual. It no longer feels like drowning. It feels like being born again. She awakens into darkness and the sound of weeping. She lies there for a few minutes, confused and uncertain. The sobs come from all sides, soft but omnipresent in Bibi's resonant shell. Resonant shell. She hears nothing else except her own heartbeat. She's afraid. She's not sure why. She wishes the sounds would go away. Clark rolls off her bunk and fumbles at the hatch. It opens into a semi-darkened corridor. Meager light escapes from the lounge at one end. The sounds come from the other direction, from deepening darkness. She follows them through an infestation of pipes and conduits. Ballard's quarters. The hatch is open. An emerald readout sparkles in the darkness, bestowing no detail upon the hunched figure on the pallet. Ballard, Clark says softly. She doesn't want to go in. The shadow moves, seems to look up at her.
Why won't you show it?
It says, its voice pleading. Clark frowns in the darkness. Show what?
You know what? How afraid you are.
Afraid?
Of being here, of being stuck at the bottom of this horrible dark ocean.
I don't understand, Clark whispers. Claustrophobia begins to stir in her, restless again. Ballard snorts, but the derision seems forced.
Oh, you understand all right. You think this is some sort of competition. You think if you can just keep it all inside, you'll win somehow. But it isn't like that at all, Lenny. It isn't helping to keep it hidden like this. We've got to be able to trust each other down here or we're lost.
She shifts slightly on the bunk. Clark's eyes, enhanced by the caps, can pick out some details now. Rough edges embroider Ballard's silhouette, the folds and creases of normal clothing, unbuttoned to the waist. She thinks of a cadaver, half dissected, rising on the table to mourn its own mutilation. I don't know what you mean, Clark says.
I've tried to be friendly, Ballard says. I've tried to get along with you, but you're so cold. You won't even admit. I mean, you couldn't like it down here. Nobody could. Why can't you just admit?
But I don't. I I hate it in here. It's like Bibi's going to clench around me, and all I can do is wait for it to happen. Ballard nods in the darkness.
Yes, yes, I know what you mean.
She seems somehow encouraged by Clark's admission.
And no matter how much you tell yourself,
She stops.
you hate it in here?
Did I say something wrong? Clark wonders.
Outside is hardly any better, you know, Ballard says. Outside is even worse. There's mudslides and smokers and giant fish trying to eat you all the time. You can't possibly. But you don't mind all that, do you?
Somehow her tone has turned accusing. Clark shrugs. No, you don't. Ballard is speaking slowly now. Her voice drops to a whisper.
You actually like it out there, don't you?
Reluctantly, Clark nods. Yeah, I guess so.
But it's so. The rift can kill you, Lenny. It can kill us 100 different ways. Doesn't that scare you?
I don't know. I don't think about it much. I guess it does, sort of.
Then why are you so happy out there? Ballard cries. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm not exactly happy, Clark thinks. I don't know. It's not that weird. Lots of people do dangerous things. What about free fallers? What about mountain climbers? But Ballard doesn't answer. Her silhouette has grown rigid on the bed. Suddenly, she reaches over and turns on the cubby light. Lenny Clark blinks against the sudden brightness. Then the room dims as her eye caps darken.
Jesus Christ, Ballard shouts at her. You sleep in that fucking costume now?
It's something else Clark hasn't thought about. It just seems easier.
All this time I've been pouring my heart out to you, and you've been wearing that machine's face. You don't even have the decency to show me your goddamned eyes.
Clark steps back, startled. Ballard rises from the bed and takes a single step forward.
To think you could actually pass for human before they gave you that suit. Why don't you go find something to play with out in your fucking ocean?
And slams the hatch in Clark's face. Lenny Clark stares at the sealed bulkhead for a few moments. Her face, she knows, is calm. Her face is usually calm. But she stands there, unmoving, until the cringing thing inside of her unfolds a little. Okay, she says at last, very softly. I guess I will. Ballard is waiting for her as she emerges from the airlock.
Lenny, she says quietly, we have to talk. It's important.
Clark bends over and removes her fins. Go ahead.
Not here. In my cubby.
Clark looks at her.
Please.
Clark starts up the ladder.
Aren't you going to take...
Ballard stops as Clark looks down.
Never mind. It's okay.
They ascend into the lounge. Ballard takes the lead. Clark follows her down the corridor and into her cabin. Ballard dogs the hatch and sits on her bunk, leaving room for Clark. Clark looks around the cramped space. Ballard has curtained over the mirrored bulkhead with a spare sheet. Ballard pats the bed beside her.
Come on, Lenny. Sit down.
Reluctantly, Clark sits. Ballard's sudden kindness confuses her. Ballard hasn't acted this way since she had the upper hand.
Might not be easy for you to hear, Ballard is saying, but we have to get you off the rift. They shouldn't have put you down here in the first place.
Clark doesn't reply.
Remember those tests they gave us? Ballard continues. They measured our tolerance to stress, confinement, prolonged isolation, chronic physical danger, that sort of thing.
Clark nods slightly. So?
So, says Ballard, did you think for a moment they'd test for those qualities without knowing what sort of person would have them? Or how they got to be that way?
Inside, Clark goes very still. Outside, nothing changes. Ballard leans forward a bit.
Remember what you said about mountain climbers and free fallers and why people deliberately do dangerous things? I've been reading up, Lenny. Ever since I got to know you, I've been reading up.
Got to know me?
And do you know what thrill seekers have in common? They all say that you haven't lived until you've nearly died. They need the danger. It gives them a rush.
You don't know me at all.
Some of them are combat veterans. Some were hostages for long periods. Some just spent a lot of time in dead zones for one reason or another. And a lot of the really compulsive ones,
Nobody knows me.
the ones who can't be happy unless they're on the edge all the time, a lot of them got started early, Lenny, when they were just children. And you, I bet, you don't even like being touched.
Go away. Go away. Ballard puts her hand on Clark's shoulder.
How long were you abused, Lenny?
She asks gently.
How many years?
Clark shrugs off the hand and does not answer. He didn't mean any harm. She shifts on the bunk, turning away slightly.
That's it, isn't it? You don't have a tolerance to trauma, Lenny. You've got an addiction to it, don't you?
It only takes Clark a moment to recover. The skin, the eye caps make it easier. She turns calmly back to Ballard. She even smiles a little. Abused, she says. Now there's a quaint term. Thought it died out after the witch hunts. You some sort of history buff, Jeanette?
There's a mechanism, Ballard tells her. I've been reading about it. Do you know how the brain handles stress, Lenny? It dumps all sorts of addictive stimulants into the bloodstream. Beta endorphins, opioids. If it happens often enough, for long enough, you get hooked. You can't help it.
Clark feels a sound in her throat, a jagged coughing noise, a bit like tearing metal. After a moment, she recognizes it as laughter.
I'm not making it up, Ballard insists. You can look it up yourself if you don't believe me. Don't you know how many abused children spend their whole lives hooked on wife beaters or self mutilation or free fall?
And it makes them happy, is that it? Clark says, still smiling. They enjoy getting raped or punched out or.
No, of course you're not happy. But what you feel, that's probably the closest you've ever come. So you confuse the two. You look for stress anywhere you can find it. It's physiological addiction, Lenny. You ask for it. You always asked for it.
I ask for it. Ballard's been reading, and Ballard knows. Life is pure electrochemistry. No use explaining how it feels. No use explaining that there are far worse things than being beaten up. There are even worse things than being held down and raped by your own father. There are the times between when nothing happens at all. When he leaves you alone and you don't know for how long. You sit across the table from him, forcing yourself to eat while your bruised insides try to knit themselves back together. And he pats you on the head and smiles at you. And you know the reprieve's already lasted too long. He's going to come for you tonight, or tomorrow, or maybe the next day. Of course I asked for it. How else could I get it over with? Listen, Clark shakes her head. But it's hard to talk suddenly. She knows what she wants to say. Ballard's not the only one who reads. Ballard can't see it through a lifetime of fulfilled expectations, but there's nothing special about what happened to Lenny Clark. Baboons and lions kill their own young. Male sticklebacks beat up their mates. Even insects rape. It's not abuse, really. It's just biology. But she can't say it aloud for some reason. She tries, and she tries, but in the end, all that comes out is a challenge that sounds almost childish. Don't you know anything?
Sure I do, Lenny. I know you're hooked on your own pain, and so you go out there and keep daring the rift to kill you, and eventually it will, don't you see? That's why you shouldn't be here. That's why we have to get you back.
Clark stands up. I'm not going back. She turns to the hatch. Ballard reaches out toward her.
Listen, you've got to stay and hear me out. There's more.
Clark looks down at her with complete indifference. Thanks for your concern, but I don't have to stay. I can leave any time I want to.
You go out there now and you'll give everything away. They're watching us. Haven't you figured it out yet?
Ballard's voice is rising.
Listen, they knew about you. They were looking for someone like you. They've been testing us. They don't know yet what kind of person works out better down here. So they're watching and waiting to see who cracks first. This whole program's still experimental. Can't you see that? Everyone they've sent down, you, me, Ken Lubin, and Lavina Chung, it's all part of some cold-blooded test.
And you're failing it, Clark says softly. I see.
They're using us, Lenny. Don't go out there.
Ballard's fingers grasp at Clark like the suckers of an octopus. Clark pushes them away. She undogs the hatch and pushes it open. She hears Ballard rising behind her.
You're sick!
Ballard screams. Something smashes into the back of Clark's head. She goes sprawling out into the corridor. One arm smacks painfully against a cluster of pipes as she falls. She rolls to one side and raises her arms to protect herself. But Ballard just steps over her and stalks into the lounge. I'm not afraid, Clark notes, getting to her feet. She hit me, and I'm not afraid. Isn't that odd? From somewhere nearby, the sound of shattering glass. Ballard's shouting in the lounge.
The experiment's over. Come on out, you fucking ghouls.
Clark follows the corridor, steps out of it. Pieces of the lounge mirror hang like great jagged stalactites in their frame. Splashes of glass litter the floor. On the wall, behind the broken mirror, a fisheye lens takes in every corner of the room. Ballard is staring into it.
Did you hear me? I'm not playing your stupid games anymore. I'm through performing.
The quartzite lens stares back impassively. So you were right, Clark muses. She remembers the sheet in Ballard's cubby. You figured it out. You found the pickups in your own cubby. And Ballard, my dear friend, you didn't tell me. How long have you known? Ballard looks around, sees Clark.
You've got her fooled, all right, she snarls at the fisheye. But she's a goddamn basket case. She's not even sane. Your little tests don't impress me one fucking bit.
Clark steps toward her. Don't call me a basket case, she says, her voice absolutely level.
That's what you are, Ballard shouts. You're sick. That's why you're down here. They need you sick. They depend on it. And you're so far gone you can't see it. You hide everything behind that mask of yours. And you sit there like some masochistic jellyfish and just take anything anyone dishes out. You ask for it.
That used to be true, Clark realizes as her hands ball into fists. That's the strange thing. Ballard begins to back away. Clark advances, step by step. It wasn't until I came down here that I learned that I could fight back, that I could win. The rift taught me that, and now Ballard has too. Thank you, Clark whispers, and hits Ballard hard in the face. Ballard goes over backwards, collides with a table. Clark calmly steps forward. She catches glimpses of herself in a glass icicle. Her capped eyes seem almost luminous.
Oh, Jesus, Ballard whimpers. Letty, I'm sorry.
Clark stands over her. Don't be, she says. She sees herself as some sort of exploding schematic, each piece neatly labeled. So much anger in here, she thinks. So much hate. So much to take out on someone. She looks at Ballard, cowering on the floor. I think, Clark says, I'll start with you. But her therapy ends before she can even get properly warmed up. A sudden noise fills the lounge, shrill, periodic, vaguely familiar. It takes a moment for Clark to remember what it is. She lowers her foot. Over in the communications cubby, the telephone is ringing. Jeanette Ballard is going home today. For half an hour, the scaife has been dropping deeper into midnight. Now the comm monitor shows it settling like a great bloated tadpole onto BB's docking assembly. Sounds of mechanical copulation reverberate and die. The overhead hatch drops open. Ballard's replacement climbs down, already mostly skinned, staring impenetrably from eyes without pupils. His gloves are off. His skin is open up to the forearms. Clark sees the faint scars running along his wrists, and smiles a bit inside. Was there another Ballard up there, waiting, she wonders, in case I had been the one who didn't work out? Out of sight down the corridor, a hatch hisses open. Ballard appears in shirt sleeves, one eye swollen shut, carrying a single suitcase. She seems about to say something, but stops when she sees the newcomer. She looks at him for a moment. She nods briefly. She climbs into the belly of the scaife without a word. Nobody calls down to them. There are no salutations, no morale-boosting small talk. Perhaps the crew have been briefed. Perhaps they figured it out on their own. The docking hatch swings shut. With a final clank, the scaife disengages. Clark walks across the lounge and looks into the camera. She reaches between mirror fragments and rips its power line from the wall. We don't need this anymore, she thinks, and she knows that somewhere far away, someone agrees. She and the newcomer appraise each other with dead white eyes. I'm Lubin, he says at last. Chapter 3. House Cleaning. So, they say you're a beater. Lubin stands in front of her, his duffel bag at his feet. Slavic, dark hair, pale skin, a face planed out by an underskilled woodworker. One thick eyebrow shading both eyes. Not tall, 180 centimeters maybe, but solid. You look like a beater. Scars. Not just on the wrists, on the face, too. Very faint, a webwork echo of old injuries. Too subtle for deliberate decoration, even if Lubin's tastes run to that, but too obvious for reconstructive work. Medical technology learned how to erase such telltales decades ago. Unless the injuries were really bad. Is that it? Did something chew your face down to the bone a long time ago? Lubin reaches down, picks up his bag. His covered eyes betray nothing. I've known beaters in my day. You fit. Sort of. Any preference which cubby I take? He asks. It's strange, hearing that voice coming out of a face like his. It sounds almost pleasant. Clark shakes her head. I'm second on the right. Take any of the others. He steps past her. Daggers of reflective glass protrude from the edges of the far wall. Within them, Lubin's fractured image disappears into the corridor. Into the corridor at Clark's back. Corridor at Clark, corridor at Clark. Click, click. She moves across the lounge to that jagged wall. I should really clean this up one of these days. She used to like the way the mirrors worked since Ballard's adjustments. The jigsaw reflections seem more creative, somehow, more impressionistic. Now, though, they're beginning to wear on her. Maybe it's time for another change. A piece of Ken Lubin stares at her from the wall. Without thinking, she drives her fist into the glass. A shower of fragments tinkles to the floor. You could be a beater. Just try it. Just fucking try it. Oh, Lubin says, behind her. There's still enough mirror left to check. Her face is free of any expression. She turns to face him. I'm sorry if I startled you, Lubin says quietly, and withdraws. He does seem sorry, at that. So, you're not a beater. Clark leans against the bulkhead. At least not my kind of beater. She's not exactly sure how she knows. There's some vital chemistry missing between them. Lubin, she thinks, is a very dangerous man. Just not to her. She smiles to herself. Beating means never having to say you're sorry. Until it's too late, of course. She's tired enough of sharing the cubby with herself. Sharing it with someone else is something she likes even less. Lenny Clark lies on her bunk and scans the length of her own body. Past her toes, another Lenny Clark stares coolly back. The jumbled topography of the forward bulkhead frames her reflected face like a tabletop junkyard turned on edge. The camera behind that mirror must see the same thing she does, but distorted around the edges. Clark figures on a wide-angle lens. The GA wouldn't want to leave the corners out of range. What's the point of running an experiment if you can't keep tabs on your subject animals? She wonders if anyone's watching her now. Probably not. At least, nobody human. They'll have some machine, tireless and dispassionate, something that watches with relentless attention as she works or shits or gets herself off. It will be programmed to call flesh and blood if she does anything interesting. Interesting. Who defines that parameter? Is it strictly in keeping with the nature of the experiment, or has someone programmed more personal tastes on the side? Does anyone else get off when Lenny Clark does? She twists on the bed and faces the headboard bulkhead. A spaghetti bundle of optical filaments erupts from the floor beside her pallet and crawls up the middle of the wall, disappearing into the ceiling. The seismic feeds on their way to the communications cubby. The air conditioning inlet sighs across her cheek, just to one side. Behind it, a metal iris catches strips of light sectioned by the grating, ready to sphincter shut the moment delta P exceeds some critical number of millibars per second. BB is a mansion with many rooms, each potentially self-isolating in case of an emergency. Clark lies back on the bunk and lets her fingers drop to the deck. The telemetry cartridge on the floor is almost dry now, fine runnels of salt crusting its surface as the seawater evaporates. It's a basic broad-spectrum model, studded with half a dozen senses: seismic, temperature, flow, the usual sulfates and organics. Sensor heads disfigure its housing like the spikes on a mace. Which is why it's here, now. She closes her fingers around the carrying handle. Wow, okay. She closes her fingers around the carrying handle, lifts the cartridge off the deck. Heavy. Neutrally buoyant in seawater, of course, but 9.5 kilos in atmosphere according to the specs. Mostly pressure casing, very tough. An active smoker at 500 atmospheres wouldn't touch it. Maybe it's a bit of overkill, sending it up against one lousy mirror. Ballard started the job with her bare hands, after all. Odd that they didn't make them shatterproof. But convenient. Clark sits up, hefting the cartridge. Her reflection looks back at her. Its eyes, blank but not empty, seem somehow amused. Miss Clark, you okay? It's Lubin. I heard. I'm fine, she says to the sealed hatch. There's glass all over the cubby. One stubborn shard, half a meter long, hangs in its frame like a loose tooth. She reaches out, mirror fragments tumble off her thighs, and taps it with one hand. It crashes to the deck and shatters. Just house cleaning, she calls. Lubin says nothing. She hears him move away up the corridor. He's going to work out fine. It's been a few days now, and he's been scrupulous about keeping his distance. There's no sexual chemistry at all, nothing to set them at each other's throats. Whatever Ken Lubin did to Lana Chung, whatever those two did to each other, won't be an issue here. Lubin's tastes are too specific. For that matter, so are Clark's. She stands up, head bent to avoid the metal incrustations on. I did say that right. Nice. I stopped myself because I thought I didn't. Head bent to avoid the metal encrustations on the ceiling. Glass crunches under her feet. The bulkhead behind the mirror, freshly exposed, looks oily in the fluorescent light. A ribbed gray face with only two distinguishing features. The first is a spherical lens, smaller than a fingernail, tucked up in one corner. Clark pulls it from its socket, holds it between thumb and forefinger for a second. A tiny glass eyeball. She drops it to the glittering deck. There's also a name, stamped into one of the alloy ribs. Hansen Fabrication. It's the first time she's seen a brand name since she arrived here, except for the GA logos pressed into the shoulders of their dive skins. That seems odd somehow. She checks the light strip running the length of the ceiling, white and featureless. An emergency hydrox tank next to the hatch. DOT test date, pressure specs, but no manufacturer. She doesn't know if she should attach any significance to this. Alone now. Hatch sealed, surveillance ended, even her own reflection shattered beyond repair. For the first time, Lenny Clark feels a sense of real safety here in the station's belly. She doesn't quite know what to do with it. Maybe I could let my guard down a bit. Her hands go to her face. At first she thinks she's gone blind. The cubby seems so dark to her uncapped eyes, walls and furniture receding into mere suggestions of shadow. She remembers turning the lights down in increments in the days since Ballard's departure, darkening this room, darkening every other corner of BB Station. Lubin's been doing it too, although they never talk about it. Oops. For the first time, she wonders at their actions. It doesn't make sense. IPACs com ICAPs. ICAPs compensate automatically for changes in ambient light, always serve up the same optimum intensity to the retina. Why choose to live in a darkness you don't even perceive? She nudges the lights up a bit. The cubby brightens. Bright colors jar the eye against a background of gray on gray. The hydrox tank reflects fluorescent orange. Readouts wink red and blue and green. The handle on the bulkhead locker is a small exclamation of yellow. She can't remember the last time she noticed color. ICAPs draw the faintest images from darkness, but most of the spectrum gets lost in the process. Only now, when the lights are up, can color reassert itself. She doesn't like it. It seems raw and out of place down here. Clark puts her ICAPs back in, dims the lights to their usual minimal glow. The bulkhead fades to a comforting wash of blue pastels. Just as well. Shouldn't get too careless anyway. In a couple of days, BB will be crawling with a full staff. She doesn't want to get used to exposing herself. And that will be it for today. Hope people are digging it. It is intense, it is dark, it is a bit edgy, as evidenced by the whole implied and later explicit history of abuse, and then twists inherent with that in Lenny Clark's background, and the people who are being made to be rifters. So, briefly, let me real quick. BB. Not the chemist. Where are you? I don't think it's the chemist. BB. Nope, that is a woman. That is the wrong BB. Oh, what's his name? Not radio. I think it's William Beebe. Yeah, that's the one. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, the marine biologist. So Beebe Station is named after William Beebe. Charles William Beebe, born July 29th, 1877, and died June 4th, 1962. Was an American naturalist, ornithologist, marine biologist, entomologist, explorer, and author. He is remembered for the numerous expeditions he conducted for the New York Zoological Society, his deep dives in the bathysphere, ding ding ding, and his prolific scientific writing for academic and popular audiences. So this is the guy BB Station is named after, probably, most likely. This is the kind of guy, because of his explorations in the bathysphere. Incidentally, you can find one of his old bathyspheres in Bermuda. It's I think at a museum, if memory serves, at an aquarium. It's very cool. It is literally a metal ball with glass portholes, designed to take intense pressure. Intense pressure. So very cool stuff. And he discovered some dinosaur fossils, including the hypothesizing that there were transitional forms between dinosaurs into birds, which he wound up being quite right on. Piccard, Piccard, is actually so. I'd be hard pressed to be absolutely certain which Piccard is being mentioned or referred to with Piccard Station. It could be practically any of them because they are a family of explorers. which is awesome. So first off, you'd have Grandpappy Auguste Picard, who is the absolute mad lad who went up into, what would you call that? Would you call that the exosphere? Way, 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 way up. Basically to detect cosmic rays. Very high up, where there is essentially no atmosphere, or certainly no breathable atmosphere, which is a oh my gosh, it's that entire journey is fraught with peril. Like if you've ever read like a The Martian style science fiction book about trying to survive, where problems keep happening and having to solve those problems and save your bacon, this expedition is that. Like it's that absolutely. So it looks like he is credited with the development of the bathyscaphe, the FNRS-2. I know his son Jacques, I believe it was Jacques, yes, Jacques Picard, worked with him on that, and then would do some exploration of his own. Deep sea stuff, uh, Jacques did a lot of that. So it could be named after Jacques. Jacques' son has been getting up to interesting activities. What's his name? Bertrand, I think. Bertrand, yes. He built that solar plane not so long ago, and was doing a solar impulse. There we go. Basically going across around the Earth, in a solar powered plane. He did a big circumnavigation of the globe using a balloon, without landing. It was the first successful nonstop balloon circumnavigation of the globe. So all of the Picard family are noteworthy explorers and very interesting sciencey people. They're very cool. Definitely worth reading up on them. They're very neat people. BB also fits very much into that because he's like this old Renaissance man, everyman, scientist individual, uh, that just kind of did everything and did it, just pushed the boundaries. So really, Picard Station could be, yeah, this is saying Picard is a French surname variant form of Picard. And if you are wondering if Jean-Luc Picard of Star Trek The Next Generation is, I don't know, somehow attached to that, but with one less C, you'd be dead right. That was an homage to these people. They are excellent. They are well worth reading up on. Jacques Picard, I would guess, is the most likely of the ones being referred to for Picard Station down below, but it could honestly be any of them. Either him or his father, Auguste. Well worth your time to read up on them. So I will be doing more of these, obviously. Crunchy. And yeah, so we're a sixth to a seventh of the way through the book. I will. So the next part is probably longer. I think that's closer to like 50 pages. This was how many? This was like 40 something. Let's see, that's page 54. It starts on page 9. So yeah, or 30 something, which works out perfectly time wise. The next chunk could wind up being longer. Let me see how long that one is. I may have to cut that one off. We'll split it into two. I don't mind doing that. I just don't want to do it so it's like one chapter on the back end. But yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's like 50 pages. 55 pages, in fact, if I'm counting correctly, and I am. So yeah, hope people dig it. This is going to be the project for the next several weeks. When is... Okay, we miss Halloween. Barely. By 2 days. 3 days. By 3 days. because I was gonna maybe do like something for a Halloween pre-Halloween stream or post-Halloween stream. We'll see. I might do some like H.P. Lovecraft short stories or something, because those are fun. Say what you will about H.P. Lovecraft. He was a horrible human being, but my goodness, could he write a ripping yarn when he set his mind to it? And some really not ripping yarns. Some of his stories suck, but some of them are really good. Really, really good. So we'll see. Probably I won't. Actually, if that's. Geez, I have to come up with a decent Mecha Monday thing for Halloween because that's on a Monday. Let me think on that one. What spooky Mecha Monday stuff can I do? Gosh, there's stuff I could do. Definitely, it'll come to me eventually. Ooh, I know the one. Oh my gosh, what was that one called? Oh, I think that's on the Sega Saturn. And it's literally a survival horror game, like on Mars, where you pilot a giant robot of some sort. Oh, what is that called? I don't remember its name. I'll see if I can get that up and running and fake it. I know of the game, I've never played it, so we'll see. Or I can find some giant robot adjacent short stories I can read. I don't know. I'll figure something out. So yeah, hopefully people dig. I do this every Friday on Free Read Fridays, where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud. Um, I do other streams throughout the week. I've got a Mecha Mondays stream where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent, and I have a Warframe Wednesdays stream where I do Warframe for a couple hours. Crowd pleasers, theoretically, that nobody tunes into, but I don't care. So I do this and I have more fun, and more people turn up for this. So expect more of it. I'll never stop. I'll never stop, even if no one watches. I do these live. So if you're noticing any wonkiness and completely unpolished, and that it's completely unpolished, well, guess what? There's a reason for that. There's a reason. Because I'm faking it. So yeah, hopefully people dug it. I'll have some more. I'll have a different book cover and probably and maybe some other images that I can show during the stream if I remember. And yeah, that's about it. So yeah, it is storming outside where I'm at. It's pretty nutty. So I'm gonna go make sure nothing's flooding. Alrighty, thanks for tuning in. So we need two more to count as a crowd. You know what? As far as I'm concerned, us two are a crowd. I'm seeing another person watching, but that might be me. Oh, hello, Mobile Magic. Thank you for tuning in. You watching is appreciated. I'm not gonna harp and be like, "Oh, you should totally like, subscribe, or whatever," because honestly, who wants to hear that? Who ever wants to hear that? The algos are gonna do whatever they're gonna do, and I'm not gonna. I I had no hope for them working my way anyway. Although there was that one stream where I got like 20 people on for some reason. It was really spooky. I didn't know what to do with it. But yeah, I do it every week. If you can't catch it on when I'm doing them, feel free to just watch them after the fact. It's totally fine. I'm not picky. These after the fact things where I'm rambling for like half an hour are going to make no sense, but I don't care. you know, it's no skin off my back. It's fine. So yeah, see you all later. Have a great day. Hopefully your weather's slightly better than mine, or a lot better. And stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Alrighty, see you all next time. Thanks again. Bye.